What they expected their government to do was go in and do an analysis of the work that's performed and then make cuts where it makes sense, using a scalpel, not a chainsaw as we've seen on television.
Sister Greenwald, I want to bring you in to talk to us about how the union has been fighting back against this, and also, against attacks on your members at other agencies. How are you kind of fending some of this off? Sister Farman mentioned that she's still got a job, so that's great. So what are you doing to keep her and others employed?
So at the National Treasury Employees Union, we represent employees in 37 different federal agencies. And we're seeing varying attacks on all of those agencies by this administration. And, I have to give my hats off to my brothers and sisters at the CFPB, because they were the first out of the box to really get these kind of attacks driven at them. It was almost personal in nature. And they stood up and they've, stood strong against all of this. Because they care deeply and are passionate about the work they do for the American people. And they want to keep doing that work. And that is the common thread for all of our federal agencies, that federal employees take an oath to the Constitution. They want to serve the mission of each agency that they work for, and they want to serve the American people to the best of their abilities. And this administration and these attacks on federal workers is really causing chaos and anxiety. It is forcing people from the federal government, and it is really eliminating services that Americans depend on every day. And so from a union perspective, we're doing everything in our power to fight back against these attacks. And we would urge Congress to also join us in fighting back against these attacks. You just talked about conflicts of interest. And every American should be concerned about what this DOJ organization is doing. They are into data that they have no business being into. We're concerned about privacy attacks on that. What are they doing with that data? I just saw a recent report indicating that there may be up to 70% of conflicts of interest in the work that they're doing and the data they're accessing. And so as Americans, they take their private information seriously. They don't want people who don't have a need to know to have it. And so, to me, we need equal branches of government to stand up against some of these attacks and stand for federal workers. Americans voted for this administration because the administration said that they were going to come in and that they were going to make government work better for the American people. Instead, what we've seen is not an effort at efficiency, but an effort at chaos and dismantling the government as we know it. And the people who are being harmed by that are average Americans who depend on the resources of the federal government. And so as a union, we are fighting very hard for our federal workers to make sure that they retain their rights in the contracts that we have legally negotiated on their behalf, and using the courts to uphold those rights every chance we can.
You referenced Congress, and I want to bring that into this picture because Congress has, particularly over the last week or two, been putting forward proposals that would materially degrade the working conditions of all federal employees even further, even beyond, the layoffs and the degradations of, the return to office and the degradations of like the ability to perform the work, that Kat has been talking about. But what are some of the, but we're talking about budgets, stuff that's going in the budget, like how the federal workers are going to be paid, what their benefits are going to be like. What are some of these attacks that the Republicans are proposing?
Well, so we're seeing across the board attacks, whether it be pay cuts to propose salaries, to changes in retirement systems, to changes in how retirement is calculated, changes in general insurance. I mean, all of these things add up to giant pay cuts for federal workers. And let's be clear, I understand that Americans want their tax dollars used efficiently and effectively. So do federal employees. They're happy to point out any areas that there could be savings found. And what they expected their government to do was go in and do an analysis of the work that's performed and then make cuts where it makes sense, using a scalpel, not a chainsaw as we've seen on television. What they're trying to do, though, is at the cost of the federal government in dismantling it, is arrive at large savings to fund tax cuts for the very wealthy. And what that means is services to average Americans who rely on it, like Meals on Wheels, cutting things like our national park services and the services that they provide and the protections they provide in our national parks. In food inspectors, people who make sure the food we eat and the water we drink are safe. Those are things that are being cut, and they're not being analyzed, they're just being cut. And so this is nothing about efficiency. This is about trying to achieve a bottom line to fund tax cuts that really are at the expense of average working Americans.
Right, right. Yeah, it's so, so gross, especially as, you know, federal workers are generally speaking underpaid as it is. I'm sure that you can speak to this, but like when I was talking to, when I've lobbied on the Hill for my union, AFGE, before, and the fact sheets that they give us at that time, I think the pay gap between federal employees and our private sector counterparts, like similarly situated private sector workers, was something like 27%. And I don't think that it's changed significantly in the intervening years. And so the idea that I'm going to further make it even worse to work here, especially as, we talked to some folks from NIOSH 3 or 4 weeks ago, and while we were on the call with them, an engineer texted one of them, who was the local union president, and said that he already has a job offer from the private sector for double the amount of pay that he was making at NIOSH, but he doesn't want to take it because he wants to work for NIOSH so that he can protect coal miners and workers in this country. He doesn't want to go work in the private sector for a corporation. He wants to serve the people. And I'm sure, I don't know, Kat, are there dynamics like that at the CFPB? Could you go and get a job like at a bank or something making significantly more than you make now?
Certainly, yes, that is absolutely. The revolving door is a real threat to average person's, ability to access services, because people don't stick around to provide those services if they can't count on the stability or wage growth that keeps up with inflation, right? And so they're going to be looking for greener pastures and find them in the private sector that, then they also have skills and knowledge from the regulation side that the private sector can exploit. And we've seen, people will go work for, this is not a recent phenomenon, this is not new, right? But it's accelerated under these kinds of circumstances. But you hear about people who go work as VPs for big banks. You hear about people who are hired by fintech companies, these online, lenders that you see on e-commerce sites, right? That are very exploitative, that have very high interest rates. And that people can get trapped in. And so people will go and work for these companies, these for-profit companies, even if they don't want to. I know that we've also had the flip, right? We've had people who were working in exploitative industries like private loans, debt collection, and then they come and work at CFPB in the public service side of it, and they're relieved to be able to finally use the skills that they have developed in the private sector for the public good, right? To be able to help like your fellow human being and provide a useful public service. And that I experienced that. I've had private sector jobs, where we're making software and websites to help big corporations like Unilever make money. And it didn't really feel satisfying to know that that's how my skills were being used on a daily basis, and you really feel that like pull towards something more meaningful. I believe all workers want and deserve to have work that's dignified, but also meaningful. To be able to, part of that dignified is being able to do work that is helping people and not damaging a society. And being able to do public service, public sector work is really appealing for that reason. And that's why you end up seeing people do take pay cuts or do want to stick around despite the ability to get paid more in the private sector. Because I think fundamentally humans want to feel we have pro-social tendencies towards helping each other. We want to feel like we're doing something useful. for each other. And so people are able to come into public sector and stay doing that so long as they're compensated enough and the working conditions are fair. And so now you're seeing people getting pushed out with this chaos, destruction, these attacks on us and our work, and getting lured by private sector is an issue, but also I think just the chaos. Russ Vogt, who I mentioned earlier, Project 2025 author and my boss at CFPB right now, he said he wants to traumatize the federal workers. That's his goal. He wants us to feel terrible and traumatized and attacked every day that we have to get up and go to work in this environment until he can get rid of us. And I think that is affecting people. How could it not? I mean, these kinds of the destabilizing effects of what they're doing, people not knowing when am I going to get some layoff notice, even when we're winning like we are at CFPB Union, to keep our jobs for now, we don't know what the next attack could come after the next court decision, right? So we don't know how long it's going to last. So people feel that uncertainty and instability. And even if they really want to do public sector, public service work and are proud of the work we've done, not everyone can handle that. Not everyone should have to. So they have to leave. And that's the goal too, is forcing people out.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Some of the, specifically some of the things that were really, I can't remember what it was specifically, but there was a way that you could get around one of these cuts if you volunteered to be an at-will employee. I think that was the pension or something. You could like the Republicans are wanting to impose higher pension contributions from the employee, but you don't have to do that if you become an at-will employee. In addition to, the wage cuts and the healthcare cuts that they're proposing, it's all really, really bad. It's going to make working for the federal government worse. And so, Doreen Greenwald, how are the National Treasury Employees Union and other federal unions fighting back against these proposals to degrade wages, benefits, and working conditions?
So first, we're working together to get the facts out, because a lot of these proposals are based on just false information. I mean, we've seen over the last 50 years, the federal government, as opposed to the population, has actually decreased. And where people, they're walking around and saying the federal government is bloated. Not true. It's actually decreased. Federal employees are paid on average 25% less than the private sector. So it's not as if they're coming to the federal government to get rich. They're coming to the federal government because they have unique skills and knowledge, and they're there to serve the American public. They take that very seriously. They're very policy oriented and driven. And so this chaos that they're creating is really to push people out, and it's going to affect the government going forward, because who's going to want to come work for the federal government when they're treated in such a way? The same with overall, the federal workforce is about 4% of the entire budget. So while they focus, like, if we take all these cuts and do all these things, the American people are going to get all this money back. That's just not true. So there's a lot of false information out there, and it impacts our communities. 85% of the federal workforce works outside of DC. So many people think, oh, these are just trims to the Washington, D.C. budget. It's not going to impact me. But we're already seeing Social Security offices, IRS offices closing in local communities, people being laid off in their communities. The federal workforce is an incredible filter and feeds a lot of these small communities and gives them services that they would not have access to. So when you shut down parts of the federal government, you're impacting research being done in universities across the country. You're impacting the ability to care for our American people through health and human services and some of the science that's going on there. The national parks, as I've said, affect the entire country. So while Americans support having a government that works effectively and efficiently, they want that done in a way that is respectful and pays attention to the services that they rely on. And so I will tell you, it is when somebody interacts with a federal employee, the numbers are outrageously high that they support and believe in the work that federal employees do. And so the whole point of this false information is to vilify them so they can take these actions and make them appear as if they're not human beings. These are good people who come to work every day. I have watched people walked out of buildings for no cause, not for conduct, not for performance, and fired for no reason, just to make a public spectacle of them, and only for us to fight to have them come back. And when Americans see that's happening to their neighbors, their friends, people they go to church with, they're outraged. And we're seeing that in town halls, that they want Congress to stand up to this administration, that they want a balance on power to make sure that the work that the federal government does continues to happen on their behalf. And these cuts are solely done to fund these ill thought through tax cuts.
Right. We had a chatter. Palace Real said some people just want to do a job they are proud of. They aren't always looking to make the most money possible. Adam S. says our job for our government is a job with meaning, and I really agree with both of those things. National Treasury Employees Union National President Doreen Greenwald and NTEU Chapter President at the CFPB, Kat Farman, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that you want that you want to make sure that you leave our audience with before we let you go?
I would just give a shout out as well to federal employees. Nearly 30% of federal employees are veterans who have served this country in the armed forces and continue their service as federal employees. And they too are getting treated in this same way. And they deserve so much more from this country. We need to all stand up together and fight back against these attacks, because we want a country that works effectively and efficiently for the American people. And these plans damage that going forward. So if we all work together, we can come out of this better by working together and shining a light on these damaging effects and doing what's right for the American people.
Yeah, and I would add to following the money, right? We know that Elon Musk is the richest man on the planet, and he's spearheading these attacks on our public services and our public goods. What's in it for him, right? What's in it for the billionaire class, the wealthy class, the health insurance CEOs, Wall Street companies? What do they get and gain from attacking, defunding, and ending public services that serve working Americans? They get an opportunity. They get a cash grab. They get a privatization opportunity, and paying attention to who's doing this, who benefits, and what they would like to replace our public services with, instead of improving them, instead of getting more Americans to have a say and a democratic participation in making these services work better for us. What are they actually trying to do and get rid of, and what are they going to replace it with, right? They're going to privatize. They're going to look for ways they can put in middlemen to make more money off of us. And when you put it that way and you really see that is their goal, I think that's when you realize, like, there's no one who's going to stop them on their side if they have money to gain. That's really their goal. And so we have to be the ones who stand up and say, actually, we deserve better, and we don't want to give all this away to you. You don't own us. You don't own these services. You don't own our government. You don't own our democracy. But it is going to have to be us, the working Americans, who are willing to do that.
NTEU National President Doreen Greenwald, NTEU Chapter President Kat Farman, thank you both so much for your time. I appreciate it. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.